Good afternoon. If we could get started. Good afternoon. Welcome to this news conference summing up the observation mission of the international observers. We'll be hearing from the three ladies and gentlemen here on the panel: George Tsereteli, Special Coordinator and Leader of the OSCE Short-Term Observer Mission, and then from Margareta Kiinanen, Head of the OSCE PA Delegation, and Ursula Gacek, Head of the ODIHR Election Observation Mission. We'll then be open to questions from journalists only, but first of all, Mr. Tsereteli, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Katya. Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, dear guests, thank you for coming to our press conference. My name is George Tsereteli, as it was announced. Already a member of Georgian Parliament and a President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and a Special Coordinator of the OSCE Short-Term Observation Mission. As a Special Coordinator, I'm pleased to report on behalf of about 300 observers who work together for this mission. The deployment of such a large and strong team of parliamentarians and experts reflects the importance that we attach to this election in Kazakhstan. Overall conclusion on yesterday's elections is the 9 June early presidential election in the Republic of Kazakhstan offered an important moment for potential political reforms, but it was tarnished by clear violations of fundamental freedoms as well as pressure on critical voices. While there were 7 candidates coming from different political parties and associations, and for the first time a woman, considerable restrictions on the right to stand and limits to peaceful assembly and expression inhibited genuine political pluralism. Despite the short time available, preparations for the election were efficiently organized, and election day proceedings were orderly. However, significant irregularities were observed on election day, including cases of ballot stuffing and a disregard of counting procedures, meant that an honest count could not be guaranteed as required by OSCE commitments. There were widespread detentions of peaceful protesters on election day in major cities. This election represented an important moment for Kazakhstan society, as this was the first time that the long-serving first president was not running. However, this election took place with a legal framework which limited competition due to the strict eligibility criteria. For example, the requirement of 5 years of experience in the civil service or elected government office significantly reduced the potential number of presidential candidates. It is commendable that the elections were organized on such a short notice. However, electoral mechanisms and guidelines still need refining. While the polling proceeded in a generally calm and orderly manner, our observers reported significant procedural errors, mostly in counting and tabulation. It was concerned to hear that peaceful protesters and protests which took place yesterday in major cities were forcefully broken up by law enforcement and led to numerous detentions. Such events are deeply disturbing, and overreaction could seriously damage the reputation of a country. The expectations of the Kazakh people are high that a new president will strengthen democratic institutions, implement social reforms, and promote civil society development in line with OSCE commitments, and which I am sure will be backed by international community. It's crucially important for the leadership of the country to seize this opportunity and to advance constructive dialogue with actors, with the political actors, and society as a whole. It is evident the voices of youth should be heard and taken into account. They are more vocal, more active, and their energy could serve for positive changes. I appreciate the very good cooperation we have enjoyed with my colleagues from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and our partners from ODIHR. I'd like to particularly thank, of course, all the team, but Ambassador Gacek for her leadership, and I'd like also to recognize Ingeborg Gisladotir here in the hall, Director of ODIHR. So their competence and experience were a very valuable asset for the joint effort. I also want to particularly thank all the local experts, representatives of civil society and media and political actors who took the time to talk to us in recent days to give a clear overall picture of the situation in Kazakhstan. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We move to Margareta Kinanellen, head of the OSCP delegation.
Thank you, Katja. Thank you, Mr. Special Coordinator, and thank you, Ms. Gacek, and thanks to the entire ODIHR team for our good cooperation during this mission here in Kazakhstan. Dear guests, excellencies, specialists from the media, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address you today as the head of delegation of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, which deployed for this early presidential election in Kazakhstan 41 members of parliament coming from 21 different countries of the OSCE area. Some colleagues are here in the room. I thank them for staying and paying attention. It is with great interest that we came to observe this election. I would like to comment the fact that for the first time in the history of the independent Republic of Kazakhstan, a woman stood as presidential candidate after defeating 5 male colleagues in a tough internal competition. This is a positive development that I would like to underline, and I hope it is the prelude to the greater integration of women in politics on all levels, especially also in parliaments, not only in Kazakhstan, but also in all other countries of the OSCE area. In our joint statement of preliminary findings and conclusions with the OSCE ODIHR, which will be circulated after this press conference, or it has already been handed out, we provide our comprehensive assessment of the election process. Electoral preparations were efficiently administered, and voting yesterday generally proceeded in an orderly manner inside the polling stations. However, yesterday's massive arrests of peaceful demonstrators in the streets, including journalists, violate the constitutionally guaranteed freedoms of assembly and expression. Furthermore, the legal framework for media contains a number of restrictive provisions, such as the criminalization of defamation and insult, and the sanctioning of the spread of false information by up to 7 years of imprisonment. Such provisions pose serious concerns as they effectively limit freedom of speech and can conduct to the self-censorship of journalists in the country. Responding to previous OSCE ODIHR concerns and recommendations, the Central Election Commission of Kazakhstan deployed efforts to increase the accuracy of voters' lists for this early presidential election. Those positive efforts included the cross-checks and enhanced electronic integration of voters' lists with the state civil register. We hope the Kazakh authorities will continue working on implementing our recommendations, including the ones that will be written in our final report, to bring the legal framework and practice further in line with international standards, as we stand ready to assist Kazakhstan in this process. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now, last but not least, please, Mrs. Gatzek, head of the ODIHR Election Observation Mission.
Thank you very much, Katja, and thank you to my colleagues. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending in such a large number this afternoon's conference. I think it shows the level of interest, shows the importance which, like us, you attach to our findings and subsequent recommendations. It has been my honor to head the election observation mission of the OSCE's Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, which has been present in Kazakhstan since early May. In that time, its international team of analysts based here in the capital, together with 22 long-term observers deployed throughout the country and a further 250 short-term observers, have had the opportunity to make a thorough analysis of the legal framework, to scrutinize the political landscape, the media environment, the space for civil society and the media, the administration of the election, and as well as to conduct first-hand observations on election day itself. Today, having observed the entire election process so far, we can conclude that a lack of respect for fundamental freedoms and widespread voting irregularities on election day left the potential for political reform untapped. Allow me to take you briefly through some of the observations that lead to this conclusion. Firstly, the lack of opportunity for genuine political competition. As Mr. Tsareli already made reference to, the right to stand as a candidate, already restrictive in previous elections, was further curtailed by new eligibility criteria after recent changes in legislation. For example, it is no longer possible to stand as an independent candidate. Our previous recommendations on the subject of candidate eligibility, unfortunately, as well as the majority of our priority recommendations made following previous elections in Kazakhstan, remain unaddressed. Secondly, the disrespect for freedom of assembly and expression by civil society and individual protesters. I think everybody is aware that yesterday peaceful protests disputing the electoral process were forcefully broken up by the police, and figures are still coming in, but at least several hundred protesters have been detained. The situation remains fluid, however, and we are still getting reports of new arrests today, as well as rapid trials held in detention centers. These are coming in all the time. But prior to yesterday, prior to election day, in the election campaign period, there were many documented instances of arrests and the imposition of fines on both activists and protesters. The restrictions on constitutionally guaranteed freedoms fell far short of the commitments Kazakhstan made more than 2 decades ago to uphold democratic principles. Thirdly, on media restrictions. What we have experienced here as observers, for example, is restricted access to online media critical of the administration either by temporarily blocking access to sites or by slowing down transfer of data to social media sites. This is just one example of how freedom of expression and the right to access information guaranteed by the Constitution have been limited during the campaign. Fourthly and finally, serious concerns over conduct on election day. As already has been mentioned, election day administration was largely efficiently organized, but we observed significant irregularities throughout the country, including ballot stuffing, identical signatures on voter lists, for example. What is more worrying, the count of the vote was negatively assessed in over half of our observations. This is completely at odds with the 1990 OSCE Copenhagen Agreement, where clear international standards against which we assess all elections are laid down. So, to conclude, these and other irregularities, which we describe and document in much greater detail in our preliminary statement, lead us to conclude that these elections did not make use of the potential for political reform in Kazakhstan. In concluding, I would also like to add my thanks to those of my colleagues, to all citizens of Kazakhstan who openly and honestly participated in our work and assisted us here, as well as to all the colleagues who worked with us tirelessly on this mission. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. We'll open the floor now to questions. As this is a news conference, I'm sure you'll understand that we'll be taking questions from journalists only. So if you could first state your name and the media outlet that you're representing before putting your question. Thank you, we've understood. Thank you. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
Представитель фонда парламентаризма.
I'm afraid that this is open to journalists only. So if you're a journalist, then we're happy to take your question.
Я представитель фонда парламентаризма в Казахстане. Могу задать вопрос?
I'm afraid this is a news conference. We're happy to talk to you after the news conference is finished. Then you're welcome to stay and talk to us then. I don't see.
Скажите, пожалуйста, вот сейчас вы озвучили о том, что вы установили факты разгона митинга, задержания и так далее. Как вы относитесь?
No, I'm sorry. After we finished, you're welcome to stay and talk to us then.
Факту, что на выборах были массовые вбросы, незаконные массовые вбросы бюллетеней, и ни один человек не был привлечен к уголовной ответственности. Хотя митингующих практически всех задержали и прошли ночные суды. Практически всех. Все были привлечены.
Thank you very much.
Тем или иным наказанием. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from journalists? Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'll use my voice because I have a microphone.
Mike's coming.
Oh, thank you. I'm sure there are lots of other journalists and people who want to speak to me, so I just wanted to step forward first. Okay, very quickly. Given your findings...
Sorry, your name?
I'm sorry, my name is Robin Forrester Walker and I represent Al Jazeera. Given the findings today, which I would say, from my assessment, your findings appear to be extremely negative, how is it that you reconcile that with the Kazakh authorities' decision to continue to allow these assessments to take place. There seems to be some kind of a paradox there with them being willing to allow for this kind of discussion and dialogue, and at the same time, the findings of your mission, which obviously are clear and have been clearly documented.
Thank you for your question. As a long-standing member of parliament and 7 years in the OSCPA delegation of my country, Switzerland, I like to answer your question by saying no. I don't see this as a contradiction at all. In fact, I think we are happy and also proud, but it takes efforts from a multilateral organization such as OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to work constructively with all our delegations. And I'd like to state, it has been alluded to before by other speakers, we have a constructive cooperation with our parliamentary delegation colleagues from Parliament of Kazakhstan. And if you read our findings and conclusions, we are here to fulfill our mandate. It was lined out by Ms. Gazek very well also, based on the commitment given by all 57 member parliaments, member states, also Kazakhstan. They signed in 1990 that they want to live up to this list of commitments, also with regard to elections. And Kazakhstan is a country, as some others, which, in my opinion, is on the way, and it must make progress to improve the rights and the freedoms that we criticize in our findings and conclusions.
Very briefly, I would add that we are always here, as in every single mission, at the invitation of the authorities. We never come uninvited. And as far as I know, we've never been not invited to anywhere. So it's very common, it's the standard procedure that we are invited, we come, and we provide an impartial, well-documented analysis based on the facts that we see and that we're able to document very, very accurately. So I can only concur with what Margareta has said.
Thank you, dear colleagues. I also would like to add maybe a few words of what was said. If you go and see the spirit of this document or our statements, it could be critical, but it's not hostile at all. So as it was described, so we are people, parliamentarians and professionals from both organizations that are coming to the countries and are trying to identify where are the bottlenecks, where are difficulties, where are not fulfilled commitments, only with one reason to then continue to work with them. I think this spirit is very important from side of ODIHR and from side of Parliamentary Assembly. Kazakhstan is an important member of our organization, but its importance also means to carry out and to live up to responsibilities and commitments which we are quite often telling to the audience all over the world or all over the OSCE region. So I'm very much hope that after tomorrow, after a new day starts, there should be much more diligent work to follow these recommendations, to amend legislation, which unfortunately still lack of some important maybe provisions to prevent all those shortcomings and violations that we saw on these elections. Frankly to say, of course, I personally, of course, expected much more better picture, but it's the process. We understand that graduality or it needs sometimes more time, but there are very important issues which should be implemented by government, and I hope that government and authorities, they have this understanding.
Thank you. The lady here with the press sign. Please, go ahead.
Здравствуйте, Международная федерация журналистов. Также я представляю коалицию правозащитников Казахстана, и вчера я была наблюдателем на одном из участков. Я считаю, что от имени всех наблюдателей, независимых наблюдателей, надо сейчас потребовать пересмотра голосования, требовать от правительства. И в этом мы хотим попросить миссию ОБСЕ, чтобы все протоколы были опубликованы. И было бы помечено на каждом из протоколов, был ли на том или ином участке независимый наблюдатель, ну вообще наблюдатели. Потому что ту эйфорию, которую мы вчера испытывали ночью, потому что вот у нас здесь пачка протоколов со Астаны. Здесь в половине участков с большим отрывом победил Касанов. Не может быть 16%, не может быть. Это все, никакого экзит-пула ни на одном участке не было. Поэтому мой вопрос к вам. Имеет ли право или возможность миссия ОБСЕ запросить у нашего правительства все протоколы? Просто чтобы они дали нашим наблюдателям.
Thank you for your comment. Our observers indeed noted that in some cases protocols were not made public, and we have made reference to this in the preliminary report. Observers did take protocols. I'm not sure whether we are able to share those. They are used mainly for us to make our assessment. However, it was also not on us to impose or in any way enforce. We're not here as an enforcement agency, we're here as an observer agency, but we do take note of your serious concern. It is something that is reflected in our report, that observers were not able to, these protocols were not made public, and also there were some other problems with observers being able to see some parts of the process clearly. But when you read the much more detailed report, I think you'll have a much better understanding of how we saw the situation in polling stations.
Thank you.
So-
Are there any other questions?
So
The
I'd like to respond to this. Yeah, I'm very sorry. Just a second. We have very well-defined mandate, what we are doing and why we're here, and I think we tried to very thoroughly examine all the, let's say, angles of those elections, and in our statement you can see maybe all the shortcomings. Sometimes maybe one could think that it's a little bit redundant, but we think that there should be also details that authorities should know and also civil society should know. So we could not go out of our mandate, so then it's up to authorities, up to government, up to maybe courts, if that will go to the courts, then to consider, and if it's anything should be investigated, it should be investigated. So when we've been in polling stations and also our observers, we saw many different observers from different organizations, so we think that process was observed, and if you have any additional, let's say, appeals or complaints, of course there are legal ways to, let's say, to apply to the special, structures.
Thank you. The lady here with the checked top.
I'm Reyhan Dimitri, I represent BBC News. I wanted to ask, what leverages does your respected organizations have to hold Kazakhstan, which is the member of your organizations, accountable for what happened here yesterday? We're just hearing a lot of concerns from people that once all of this is over, there will be more detentions and repression against activists. In fact, we're hearing reports that there are more detentions today in Almaty of youth activists. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. As far as OSCPA is concerned, and I can answer to you as the chair of the third permanent committee of OSCPA on democracy, human rights, and humanitarian questions, we are in regular dialogue with the parliamentary delegation of Kazakhstan, as of all the other 57 member states. It's a dialogue. Our organization does not have sanctions. It has been said before by my two neighbors, but we can hold dialogue. We can hold thematic seminars. We can also have bilateral contacts between parliamentary delegations. Coming from Switzerland, I can tell you that we did have, for instance, I gladly say this here publicly, we did have in March 2019 a delegation come from Kazakhstan, come to Swiss Parliament, led by the Deputy Minister of Justice of Kazakhstan. It was a broad delegation discussing precisely questions of improvements of criminal detentions, of human rights in general. So I gladly say this here, the Kazakh authorities also come to us, and it's a matter of dialogue. No country, I say this as a Swiss person, no country has the perfect system. We are all on the way to getting better. So this is the spirit also of solidarity in which we operate on the level of our parliamentary organization.
Thank you, Margareta. As a president of the Parliamentary Assembly, I also like to say that, of course, there are leverages, as you said, but this organization is as we are characterizing always, is a unique platform for dialogue. So we are fostering this dialogue and trying to overcome difficulties through discussions, through cooperation. But I think that the critical views also, and the statements that we are producing, it itself is leverage, and it should serve to increase motivation in the authorities, because reputation is important. Kazakhstan is one of the biggest countries in this region. Kazakhstan is a country which could have a very, very good and prosperous future, and these people deserve that. So I think new president and authorities, as we expressed in our statement, will very closely work with the OSCE. They are members of this organization and they have commitments and obligations. So this is, I think, very important to bear in mind to everybody, for everybody.
Thank you. Ursula, did you want to add anything?
It is a kind of continuation of the question posed by the correspondent from the BBC. For us, as the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, we have a very clearly defined mandate here. And our mandate here is to observe and to make recommendations. So in order for us to be useful, we have to be able to exercise that mandate, and participating states of the OSCE have to trust us that we will respect the limits of that mandate. It is not in our mandate to either sanction or to declare elections legal or otherwise. It goes beyond the scope of what we are mandated to do here.
Thank you. I think there was one more question, one last question, the lady with the phone.
Республиканская газета «Казахстанская правда». Вы не могли бы ответить на вопрос, сколько в общей сложности участков избирательных было охвачено вашими наблюдателями? И вообще, насколько обоснованы ваши выводы по поводу табулирования голосов, если учесть, что в процентном соотношении это все-таки небольшой процент от общего количества? Спасибо.
Okay, I'm just going to check in this is very fresh information because you can imagine this was coming in during the night. However, one thing I can assure you of, with 10,000 polling stations, I don't have an exact figure yet here. However, I can tell you that... Next page, remind me.
Yeah, that's exact figure, it should be there.
Then we have... How many did we visit?
Which paragraph? Last page, last page.
Okay, sorry. Okay, here we go. So we opened, exactly, thank you very much for reminding us. So we saw the observation of the opening was seen in 130 polling stations. The voting was observed in 1,350 of the polling stations, and counting was observed in 116 polling stations, and tabulation was in 100 of the 232 territorial election stations. However, you have to remember, we are very strict to make this a statistically significant sample. So it is spread throughout the country. We make a good mix of rural, urban. It's like an opinion poll in some ways. You know, you have to poll a certain number to give you a clear picture. But if you especially look at the territorial election commissions, where we actually were present in almost half of them, that is a very high percentage. In other cases, the statistics are scrupulously checked, and they are of a significant level with a minimum margin for error.
One very last question.
Очень коротко. Учитывая нарушения, которые мы вчера наблюдали там в Фейсбуке, о которых рассказывали.
I'm sorry, you're
My
from...
name is Татьяна Ковалева, Закон КЗ, journalist. Нарушения вчера, которые мы наблюдали в Фейсбуке. Митинги, которые мы также и своими глазами видели, и в Фейсбуке. Вот, учитывая все, что происходило во вчерашнем дне, учитывая, что коллеги готовы предоставить протоколы с участков, вот ваше мнение, в идеальном мире, учитывая всю эту картину, должны ли быть аннулированы результаты выборов или провести выборы нужно снова? Если бы это был идеальный мир, как мы с этим должны были бы поступить?
If there would be ideal world, so we could see then less violations, less shortcomings, a much more better picture around, not only in this country, but again, so maybe my colleagues also will reflect on this. But that's also important, what the scope and what's, let's say, extent of all those violations. If sometimes we have information about the very severe, let's say, violations, but it could be quite limited. So in any case, if there is anything serious, it should be very thoroughly investigated if it's necessary to investigate. Our job is to give the clear picture, what happened, where it happened, and what was the extent of that and the scope of that, if it's possible to assess.
The photographs, the pictures we saw of yesterday, and the direct reporting from our colleagues, observers, who went to the sites of the rallies here in Nur Sultan and also in Almaty, are scenes that none of us here would ever like to see again in any country. We can only appeal to all concerned parties, individuals, associations, to come to dialogue with non-violent means, to sit at the tables. As far as we heard and read, the newly elected president of Kazakhstan has strongly offered dialogue during his campaign. So, the door seems open. Please stop violence.
Yeah, and just in addition, if it was any misuse of power, as I said just a minute ago, it should be also investigated, and everybody should, who made those wrongdoings, so it should be maybe punished orderly. That's also very important to do, to prevent such events in future.
I'd like to add something. The short-term observers, the parliamentarians, will have some of them actually have already departed. Most of them will be leaving very shortly. But the ODIHR mission, the election observation mission, which is my privilege to head, we're staying for another week. And the reason we're staying is because we want to see how the complaints procedure is now followed through. So we hear your concerns. It will be part, of course, it cannot be reflected in this. We cannot foresee what's going to happen with complaints and how they are handled in the coming days. But this is not the final document that comes from this mission. In about 2 months, 2.5 months' time, we will have then the ultimate final report, which will give you a complete overview with recommendations, but which will also be able to encapsulate what happens in the period after the election. So how, for example, complaints, how many complaints there are, how they are handled. We're still here and we're still observing. Our mission as the ODIHR mission is not over yet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think it looks like that's it for all the questions. We're running on.
Maybe just, if you permit, moderator, just an information on the system of our publications, which you cannot all know. Go on our website of OSCE-PA. Go on election observation. You have an alphabetical list of our member countries, and you can go there alphabetically to find the previous reports on election observation mission in Kazakhstan, as well as in any other of our member countries. And you will be able to follow very regularly improvements that are made. Please use this source of information. Then you can also make the cross-section, the comparison between our member states. Thank you.
I would just add that on the ODIHR election section of the website, you can see the countries listed in alphabetical order, and also in terms of time chronologically, which elections we're going to be following in which countries. So again, it's very easy to follow our publications and the press releases for journalists there. Thank you very much indeed for coming. We look forward to seeing you again. Goodbye.